The shir is on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Yudches, book 18. The Sicha of Bamidbar, the second Sicha of Bamidbar. In the pasuk which says, "Count the children of Levi," you should count them, every male from 1 month old. You shall count them. That's what the pasuk says. Rashi says on the words that you shall count them from 1 month old. He explains once they've left the status of being nephalim. Nephalim means miscarriage or stillborn. Once they've left the category, I'll refer to it from now on as nephil or nephalim. Literally, the word nephil means to fall. God forbid a child is born lifeless or passes away within 30 days. It's not considered to have been a proper live birth. It's considered to be a miscarriage, stillborn, or a child that wasn't born to term. And it's not pshat that it was a live birth. That passed away, we don't consider it a full live birth till 30 days. So Rashi says, why do we count from 30 days on? Once it leaves the status of being a nephil, so then he's counted to be called a shomer mishmeres hakodesh, a guardian of the holy guardianship. We know that the Leviim, one of the functions of the Leviim, were to guard the place, the holy sanctuary, the place of the Beis Hamikdash. They camped around the Beis Hamikdash. And here we're saying once they left the status of being a nephil, he's already counted. Unlike the other children of Israel who were counted only at 20 years old, the Leviim were counted from 30 days up. Simply speaking, Rashi comes to tell us, why do we count from 1 month old? It's not because at 1 month they start to have an individualized prominence and importance, just like, for example, at 20 years old, that's an age of reaching strength. That's when he becomes eligible, he goes out to the army, Yotzei Tzava. Rashi has explained to us here that the issue of 30 days is not that that's when he reaches some kind of a status of importance, as in the parallel age for every Jew of 20 years old. No, it's just that till 30 days old, you're not yet sure that this child is not a nephil. You're not yet sure that this was a proper live birth. But intrinsically, a Levite is worthwhile to be counted immediately upon birth. As Rashi indeed continues and says that we see that this shevet, that this tribe is counted from the womb, as we're going to elaborate more on that other part of Rashi a little bit later on. So we have to understand, usually you find that Rashi doesn't give reasons in his commentary on the Torah, especially on details of mitzvahs. So this gives us, from this we understand that if Rashi did give a reason here, it's because there must be something that's being answered in the simple reading of the pasuk. And this question wouldn't have been answered were not Rashi to have brought the reason of the pasuk. So what is Rashi answering here? On the other hand, we find that in similar instances, we have similar, where it says count them from 30 days old, and Rashi doesn't say any reason. Even before our Seder, in the portion that speaks about, we read about it in the last section of Vayikra, portion, it's called the Parsha of Erchin, when somebody promises their value, commits to donate their value to the Beis Hamikdash. So the Torah gives a value, a price chart, which starts from 30 days up. If the child is 30 days and somebody says he wants to give the value of that child to Beis Hamikdash, it starts from 30. At 30, then this and this is the value. And Rashi doesn't explain there why the price chart starts only at 30 days, because less than 30 days doesn't have any value because we're still not sure it was a proper birth. Rashi doesn't explain, he just takes it for granted. So why here does he have to explain that 30 days is a significant time, is a significant time period, because then the child is considered to have been a proper live birth. There he doesn't explain it, last parsha. Similarly, when the Torah says that an animal, a bull or a sheep that gives birth, so from the 8th day and onwards, only from the 8th day and onwards, can it be used for a carbon, for sacrifice. Rashi doesn't explain there why we have to wait till the 8th day, even though Targum Yonasan does say the reason. The reason is because we have to establish that it's not a nephil. So if Rashi in those two other instances we've just quoted doesn't say the reason of 30 or 8 days, why here does Rashi all of a sudden have to bring the reason that we start counting the Levites only from 30 days? And he says because they've left the status of an Ephel. Why comment on it altogether? Rashi doesn't usually give reasons. He explains the pasuk. He doesn't give reasons for the mitzvahs. And as we see, he hasn't done it in other similar instances of this vein. Base. More wondrous is what Rashi adds, that after he leaves the possibility of being called a Nephel, then they are counted to be called the Shomer Mishmer HaKodesh, the guardian of the holy places. Rabbi has a series of questions. First of all, Rashi wants to explain why we're counting the Levites from 1 month up. What's the difference why does he add that from 1 month up, they're called the guardians of the holy guardianship? More than that, later when we talk about counting the Bechayres, the firstborns, later on in our Parsha, there's going to be a counting the firstborns. And there it also says, count the firstborn of the entire Jewish people, right? Because we're going to have the process of Pidyon Bechayr, of redeeming the firstborn. So Torah says, count them from 1 month up. There it's not about being called the guardians, the holy guardians. But the reason there, when we're talking, they're not guardians, they're not Levites. But the reason is also the same reason. What does Rashi say there when he says, count the firstborn of the Jews from 30 days up? The reason is, once they've left the possibility of being a Nephel, the suffix, they've left the classification of being even a doubtful Nephel. Maybe they won't live past 30 days. So you have to wait 30 days. Rashi doesn't add there any other intention for why we're counting for 30 days. It just says that 30 days, we establish it, that's a proper full live birth. So why here, when counting the Leviim, does Rashi add something about, from that stage on, they're called the guardians? That's one question. Number two, what did Rashi add here? In the earlier psukim, it says that Shevet Levi, we're told that the tribe of Levi, their role is to guard the holy spaces. So why does Rashi quote it here? I mean, we've seen it already in the psukim. 3, if Rashi does somehow want to re-establish or restate what the service of the tribe of Levi is, why doesn't he use the same language that was used in a previous pasuk? He doesn't use that language. He uses a language that's in a pasuk that comes later when he says the language Shomer Mishmer HaKodesh, guarding the holy guardianship. That's from a later pasuk. More than that pasuk really only is said by the tribe of Kahos. Even though, says the Rabbi now in square brackets, that the truth is that we are told there in that pasuk that it's really the tribe of Kahos was also in charge of the holy guardianship of all the Levim. But still, you could have taken a pasuk that says, that's not just written in its simple sense on Kahos. You could have taken there's many other psukim about what the Levim do that could have been used rather than this pasuk that they guard the holy guardianship. Number 4, in a previous pasuk, which speaks about the tribe of Levi being different, it says, don't count the tribe of Levi amongst the regular count of the Jewish people. What does Rashi say there? That the Legion Shel Melech, literally the legion of the king, is worthwhile to be counted separately. Here, the Rashi calls the Levim the guardians of the holy guardianship. It doesn't call them the legion of the king. Why does he just use that same language he used earlier already? When he could have said that they're counted from 30 days old, after they're no longer possible Nephil, we know that it's a proper live birth, and they're worthy to be counted them because they're the legion of the king. Why does Rashi in this instance say that they're Shomer Mishmer HaKodesh, that at 30 days they're worthy to be called guardians of the holy guardian? Gimel. So the fact, we could say that why does Rashi have to give a reason and say that the reason we count from 30 days is because that's when they leave the possibility of being called a Nephil? Why does Rashi have to explain it? Because this pasuk, count the Levium from 30 days old, comes as a continuation of a previously, of a beginning of a topic. What's the beginning of the topic of these series of psukim? It goes like this. I'm going to paraphrase the pasuk. And I have taken out the Leviim from amongst the Jewish people instead of the firstborns, and the Leviim will be for me, because really every firstborn belongs to me, because on the day that I smote every firstborn in Egypt, I was supposed to take the firstborns, but I took the Leviim. Now the Rebbe continues, since the Leviim are mine, and since that comes as a instead of tachas, as a replacement of the bechor, that the bechor, the first ones, were supposed to be in my service because I saved their lives. But instead, I'm going to take the Levim, and that includes all bechoros who was saved, all firstborns, even those that weren't 30 days old, all who was killed. The parallel smiting of every firstborn in Egypt. There was also no age limit. It was all firstborns, even if they were less than 30 days old. So if Hashem had saved every firstborn Israelite, even less than 30 days old. So now when we talk about counting the Levites, because Hashem's taking the Leviim instead of the Bechorim, so maybe there shouldn't be a need to wait till 30 days old. Just like the firstborns were saved even less than 30 days old, count the Leviim who are going to be instead of the firstborns, count them also from 30 days old, from less than 30 days old. Why would? Yeah. So that's why the Rashi comes and says, no. We start from 30 days old. Why is it 30 days old? They have to leave the classification of Nefel. So Rashi has answered a question. In other words, the pasuk says, count them from 30 days old. Rashi says, 1 second. If we just said there that Hashem wanted to take the firstborns to work for him because he saved them. Instead, he takes the Leviim. Firstborns were even at birth, even less than 30 days, he saved them. So maybe perhaps the Leviim also, but why does the Torah say Leviim start from 30 days? So that's why Rashi has to give answer the question by giving an explanation. But according to this, it's a real question, says the Rabbi, because the fact that Rashi says a reason that Levi is on its own, Rashi says a reason and a chashivus and something of prominence about the children of Levi on their own, and that's why you count them from 30 days. Let's see what the question is here. First of all, since the Leviim are in charge instead of the Jewish people, the firstborns of the Jews, and we know that you have to count the firstborn of the Jews from 1 month up. Later on in our parsha it says, count the firstborn Israelites for the purpose of redeeming them, count them from 1 month up. So we already understand if the Leviim are in their stead, and they're coming instead of redeeming, and the Bechors have to be redeemed only for 30 days. So we already know 30 days. Why do we have to give a reason here? Why does Rashi have to give a reason? Because now the Levi has left the possibility of being a Nefel. Just say the reason you have to do it for 30 days old is because they're replacing the Bechors of the Israelim, and the Bechor, the firstborn of the Israelites, were counted, as we see later in the parsha, only from 30 days. And many of the commentators of the Torah learn that way. Taken from the Medrash Bamidbar Rabba. Because the Leviim are a replacement for the Bechoros, and the Bechoros, you see later on, it's only from 30 days. Does the Rebbe in a square brackets, 1 second. Why do the Leviim counted from 30 days? Why do the firstborn counted for 30 days? Also for the same reason, because that's when they're no longer considered a possible Nefel. However, if we're saying that the reason the Leviim are counted for 30 days is because they're replacing, they are coming to redeem and replace the firstborns who are counted from 30 days, even though the 30 days of the firstborn they're no longer possible Nefel. But why are you counting a Levi from 30 days old? Oh, because that's when he's coming to redeem a firstborn. The firstborns only count for 30 days. So now the reason for the Levi becomes not because he has to leave the possibility of being a Nefel. We don't even say the reason. We just say, well, because for whatever reason, the firstborn of the Israelites are counted for 30 days old, this one is coming to replace that one, so that's why he's going to be counted. Well, what's the difference? It's a nuance. In other words, you see, is it that, well, why do we count the Levi from 30 days? Because the same reason that we count the Bechor only from 30 days. till 30 days, not a proper live birth. Or do we say, why do we count the Levies from 30 days? Well, because we count the Bechor from 30 days old. I don't know why we count the Bechor for 30 days old. Let's have that discussion when we get to the firstborns. Right now, I know that we count the Levi at 30 days only because that's how we count the Bechor. What's the difference? The Rebbe says Rebbe always wants to see a difference. And it's not just a pilpul, it's not just a pedantic nuance. The Rebbe says that nafkamin, the difference in halacha would be, what happens if somebody went and redeemed the firstborn of the Israelim with a Levi who's less than a month old? If the reason, and then the Levi went on and lived more than a month. He didn't pass away. There were many that passed, that with less than 30 days, and then they lived on. But what happens if you took one of them and redeemed one Bechor for that one Levi? So if the reason is you can't use someone less than 30 days old because the Bechor also we see has to be 30 days old, so then redemption wasn't valid. But if the reason is because the same reason we can't do a Bechor, why can't we do a Bechor? Why don't we count? Why does a Bechor less than 30 days old not need a pidyon? Because we're not sure if it's a proper birth. Similarly, why isn't a Levi able to be a replacement for a Bechor if he's less than 30 days old? Because the Levi, not 30 days old, we don't know it's a live birth. Oh, so that's just a technicality. So if he lives longer than 30 days, if we did use him to redeem less than 30 days old, and then he lived past 30 days old, so now we see there's no issue. We were worried that maybe he won't be a live birth. He'll die before 30 days old, God forbid. No, now we see he lived onwards. There was, the reason doesn't exist. Anyway, it's that's what Rebbe says in footnote 19. Anyway, get back to the inside of the Sikha. So we're asking here that since we're talking about counting the Levies from 30 days on, it comes as a continuation of saying that Hashem said, count all the Levies because I'm taking them instead of the Bechors. So the question is asked, if so, we have a question. Why does Rashi say that at 30 days they leave the possibility of being a Nefel? And that's when they become counted to be called Shomer Mishmer HaKadosh, the guardians of the holy thing, the holy places. L'chayra, it's a very simple reason. It's not because they're called Shomer Mishmer HaKadosh. It's in order because they have to come and redeem and replace the firstborns. And that's what it says later on in the parsha, clearly. So why does he say that they're counted for 30 days old? Because then they're no longer a Nefel, and that's when they start their, so to speak, their duty of being the guardians. No, it's just because they need to come and replace the firstborns. Dalit. Later, Rashi says, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shalom. Rabbi Yehuda bar Shalom says, this tribe of Levi, is used, we know about them that they're counted from the womb, as it says, that she, talking about Yocheved, the mother of Moshe, she was born to Levi in Egypt when they went into the entrance, the Pesach, the entrance of Egypt. She was born, and she's counted amongst the 70 souls that come into Egypt. Because when you count the amount of people who went into Egypt, it says 70 Jews came down to Egypt. House of Jacob numbered 70 souls. You count, you see it's only 70 minus 1. She, Yocheved, was the addition. She was born as they entered Egypt. She completed the count of 70. That's what Rashi says. And he brings it in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Shalom. So here's also, we can't understand. First of all, Rashi doesn't give reasons, unless bringing the reason answers some kind of a question you would have in the simple reading of the pasuk. So why does Rashi here bring that this tribe, we count them, they're used to being counted from the womb, as we see by Yocheved? Well, why do we need that for? Number two, the Ben Chomesh, the 5-year-old learning Torah, knows already that we count the Levium from the womb. Rashi had already said earlier That when the pasuk says, "Don't count the tribe of Levi amongst the regular count of the Jewish people," says Rashi, the legion of the king is appropriate for him to be counted alone. Another thing we should know is that Hashem saw that all those who were counted from 20 are going to have to perish in the desert. And Hashem said, I don't want the Levim to be part of this. From both of these interpretations, we understand that being the legion of the king, being different than all the regular Jewish people, their count is not similar to the rest of the count. On the other hand, what's the proof from Yocheved in our case? Here we're saying they're counting every male, and we're saying they're being counted. There it's counting Yocheved, which is a woman. We're counting here every male from 30 days in order to be called a guardian of the holiness that needs to be guarded. There it's just that they become part of the 70 souls that come in. What's the connection between the two? These questions are going to be wonderful because everyone's going to answer them. Chapter over here, Sif Hey. Another few questions in the language of Rashi. So many questions here. I lost track how many questions. There's a lot of questions. First of all, here Rashi says they're counted from the womb. Hey, that's different than the Lashon and Tanchuma, which says that they're counted when they're small, Ktanim. Here it says they're counted from the womb. Even if you want to say that Rashi changes the language in order to tell us that this means children that were just born, even less than 30 days old. And from this we'll understand why Rashi points out and highlights from Yocheved, who was born at the entrance to Egypt. But they should have said that it was Mishanoilad. Why does it say when it was that she was counted when she was born? Why does it say counted from the beten, counted from the womb? What is that meant to tell us? Number two, the Lashon Gemara is, the language of the Gemara is that she was born between the walls. Why does Rashi say she was born at the entrance to Egypt? Number three, why does Rashi say the entrance to Egypt and not just at as they were entering Egypt? What's the emphasis on the entranceway, the Pesach, the doorway of Egypt? Another question, why does Rashi bring the proof that they counted Yocheved between those who went into Egypt? From the fact that she's counting the 70 souls, there's also a proof from earlier. When they're counting the children of Leah and her descendants, and they say that they number 33, so the Medrash points out already, really, they're only 32. You need Yocheved to make it 33. Why don't we bring it from there? Why do we wait till the full count of the Jewish people going into Egypt is brought up and it says 70 and really there's only 69? Oh, Yocheved must be part of it. Even when was she born? As they were entering Egypt. When we counted the 33 descendants of Leah, we already could have said it there. So why does Rashi bring here from the 70? First of all, says that in square brackets, even though that's the way Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom brings the statement in the Medrash, but that itself, so let's ask him why he does it that way. And also Rashi, when he brings down Droshim, he only brings it when it's relevant to the simple meaning of the pasuk. So Rashi could have brought about the 33. Why does he bring about the 70? It's the same point, but the question is, why do we go to the 70? And the language there is different. Another question, why does Rashi bring the language of the Tanchuma? You'll only find 70 missing one, 70 minus one, and not, as it says, a shorter girsa in the Medrash, it says you have 69. Why does it call it 70 missing one? 70 minus one. Another question, why does Rashi repeat at the end of his Pirush, and she completed the number? He already said that she's counted in the 70. If you count them, you have 70 minus 1. Obviously, we understand that she completes the 70, right? No, Rashi continues and repeats again, and she completed the number. What is this to telling us? Also, why is Rashi saying the one who said it, Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom? Rashi only does that when that adds something to the actual meaning of his interpretation. Now says the Rebbe involved, I'm going to give you even a bigger pella, something even more wondrous. Rashi already wrote in the portion of Vayigash the same thing, that Yocheved was counted amongst the 70 that went down to Egypt. But there Rashi says it differently. First of all, Rashi says it on the verse that these are children of Leah, 33 souls, and he says, hey, you only find 32. He doesn't say you'd only find 33 missing one, you only find 32. And he says, but this is Yocheved who was born between the walls, as the coming. It doesn't say Pesach. And also, he doesn't say at the end, and she completed the number, as he does here. Also, he doesn't say who said that teaching. Even greater wonder is also in Parshas Pinchas, later on, when we talk about the count. And what's mentioned in the pasuk is that Yocheved was born to Levi in Egypt. Rashi brings that Yocheved was from the count of 70. He doesn't say, he says it in a shorter way. To paraphrase what he says there in Pinchas, when they came into the wall, she was born, and she completed the number of 70, because if you count, you'll only find 69. So even if Rashi wants to talk about this aspect of Levi being counted by talking about Yocheved being 70, he could have used the same language like Rashi and Pinchas, which is very close to the language of the Gemara in Babasa. That you find at 69, not as he says here by us, you find that Yocheved was, without Yocheved, it's 70 missing one. And also, it doesn't have to repeat like he does here. And she's counted amongst the 70 and she completed the number. And don't bring the one who said it. Why is it relevant? So the explanation, we've asked so many questions. The explanation in all this is as follows. Zion. As we've said earlier, this pasuk about counting the Levim from 30 days old comes as a continuation to what Hashem has said, and I have taken the Levim from the children of Israel, and the Levim will be mine, instead of the firstborns. So Rashi says there, I'm taking the Levim from amongst the Jewish people. I'll paraphrase, says Rashi, let me paraphrase, that the Jews will be seichrin, and will kind of rent them for my service, because the work was supposed to be done by the firstborns, and the Levim didn't sin, and so on, and therefore the Levim were chosen instead of them. That's the quote from Rashi. In other words, says the Rebbe, Rashi learns that when it says, I've taken the Levim instead of the firstborns, this is not talking about the fact that the Levim are now going to serve as a redemption for the firstborns. Now we give 5 slime to the Kohen. But that first year, every Levi that was taken let one Bechor off the hook. And then there were more Bechors, more firstborn than Levis. Those Bechors that didn't have a corresponding Levi to do the work for them needed to pay money. But here in the meantime, we're talking about Levim being taken instead as a replacement of the firstborns who were supposed to work. And then it says, Sorry. Other Mefarshim learn like this, that the Levim were taken to be, as this is counting the Levim here is because they're taken to be instead of the Bechors. In other words, they redeemed the Bechors, as I just explained. But here Rashi is saying that instruction that the firstborn should be redeemed by the being swapped, so to speak, for Levi, that comes later, after the Levim are counted. Here is something else. Here the instructions being given, Hashem says, I'm taking the Levim instead of the Bechors, that the Jews should rent them, hire them for my service. So now Rashi can't learn. In other words, it's not the individual process of redeeming the firstborns now. It's the fact that the firstborns were supposed to work, but now we need a legion to work. We need a cadre of workers. The Jewish people have to, so to speak, rent them for my service. So Rashi can't learn that the reason to be counted, Levim are counted from 30 days old, is because they're coming to redeem the firstborn of the Bnei Yisrael, and there it says that you only redeem the firstborns from 30 days on. No, you can't relate it to that. Because that we don't know yet. That's a later instruction that you got to redeem the firstborn Israelites, and that only starts for 30 days. Here, why is it starting for 30 days? Here the Torah says starting for 30 days. Rashi explains, you know why? Because still 30 days, it's still not considered a confirmed live birth. Says the Rabbi Ches, since the count of Levim comes in a continuation to the psukim that speak about the service of the Levim, so it makes sense to say that the count of the Levim is connected with their work, with their service. Oh, that makes a great question. Why? because the service of Levim starts off only from 30 days on. So if so, the count of the Levim should also have started from 30 years on, not 30 days, 30 years. When does the Levi start properly serving the Beis HaMikdash? From 30 to 50, a 20-year stint. For 30 years. So if so, one second, why are we counting here? Why don't we start counting from 30 years old? That's when we count the regular Bnei Yisrael from 20 years. That's when they go to the army. Why don't we count the Levim from 30 years? That's when they start their service. Why do we do it from 30 days? That's why Rashi has to add something. He has to say, no, from 30 days they're already counted to be called the guarders of those holy things that need to be guarded. Even from 30 days on, they already are connected to the service, to the avodah of the children of Levi. Because then, from then on, they're already called the members of those that Shemer Mishmeres HaKodesh. Test continues to live. So it's not understood. When we talk about, we understand that we have to count the tribe of Levi separately. And we can understand that we have to count them for 30 days on because they're the legion of the king. They're different than all the other tribes. But why do we already give them a title of achieving something, of doing some work, of guarding the holy spaces? Hey, they're not 30 years old yet. What are they doing at 30 days on? At 30 days. That's why Rashi brings that Rabbi Yehuda ben Reb Sholem, he taught us that tribe, they start their work early. Already from the womb, we already start considering them as having a task of value. And he right away says, not just was Yocheved counted as an individual, but she actually became part of the 70. Not just became part of 70, she actually completed the number of 70. This helps the 5-year-old understand when we talk about, because the pasuk, when it speaks about how many people came of Yaakov's house to Egypt, it makes a big to-do saying it's 70. 70 is a number of completion. And we have the 70 languages, the 70 nations. 70 is language, is a number of completion. And the Torah emphasizes 70 people came down to Egypt. Who was part of that 70? The Jewish community of 70. That's a significant number. Yocheved was the one that completed that number. In other words, she added a completion, a wholesomeness to the entire Beis Yaakov, to the entire house of Yaakov, that they should become the number, the prominent number of 70. And since this tribe is already used to Lamud, this is already their tradition, that they're counted from the womb right away when they're born, they have the ability to add and to contribute a completion to the whole community of Israel. So by Yocheved, that's why you can count them for 30 days on. And that's why they're already called those that guard those holy things that need to be guarded. A job that's relevant to all the Jewish people. Because all the Jewish people really would have to rent and hire the Levim to do the service. Now we understand why Rashi speaks about Yocheved being counted as part of the 70, not 33, because we're talking here about a significant number. 70 is the significant number. By Yocheved being counted, we see that she's not just counted as a unit. She's counted as in a significant enough way that she can complete this prestigious number of 70. Also, why it says, and she completed the number. Why the emphasis? We were asking about the emphasis. The emphasis there because it tells us she wasn't just being counted, she was actually completing the story. So now we understand that the Levim are counted from 30 days old. Why? You can't count them before 30. But really, they're already at 30 days. Once we know they're not in Ephel, then they already are called as being in the capacity of having prominence, and we call them already for their future work, that they're going to be guarding the Mishkan. That's the way we understand it now. Says that Ben Yud, a 5-year-old, at least a sharp 5-year-old, would say that's not clear. Why? Because since till the age of 30 years old, you're not really on duty to be a guard. So why are we already counting them and calling them? What does that add? That we call them, that these are the people that are going to be guarding. That's what Rashi brings the name of Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom is, we can see elsewhere he said something that will help us understand his position here. The Gemara Yerushalmi asks, it says that the days that King David was the king of the entire Jewish people was 40 years. But the Talmud Yerushalmi asked the following question. It says that King David was the king in Hebron. He was the king of the Jewish people in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months, and he was king in Yerushalayim for 33 years. No, 33 plus 7 and 6 months is 40 and 7 months. So why do we talk about him only being king for 40 years, not 40 years and 6 months? 6 months, sorry, not 7 months, 6 months. So there's several answers. Then the Gemara Yerushalmi brings Rabbi Yudan. Rabbi Yudan, the son of Reb Shalom. That's the equivalent in Bavli of Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shalom. And he says, because it says that 6 months, Yoav, the general, and all the Jewish people sat and were harassing the Moabites, I believe. Said Hashem, I told you don't start up with them. And you wanted to start up with the Moabites. Hashem took an oath and says, you're not, those 6 months that you were sitting in doing the wrong things, they're not going to be counted for you. So what do we see? From Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom, we see that the fact that the Torah has not called him king for those 6 months is because what? Is because he didn't act appropriately. And that's already a punishment. Even though he was definitely had the classification halachically as a king. Now, if we see that those 6 months are not counted because there was something not going on correct, when we talk about good, it's much more powerful. Here, the fact that the Levim are going to be guarders, so that's why we already say that they're prominent because they're going to be guarders. In other words, if we take away the prominence of a king, we take away the prominence of David for those 6 months because there was in other words, calling him not king is already a punishment, even though he was king. But the fact that we're not calling him king is a significant punishment. When we do the reversal in a good way, the fact that Levim will be at the age of 30 guardians, calling them now already guardians is a blessing for them. Yud Aleph. We have to understand this remains a little bit difficult. Why does it say they're counted from the womb? And also, why does it say they're counted? Yosef was born when they came into the doorway of Egypt. Why does it speak about 70 minus 1? And why does Rashi speak about the service of Levim and highlight their greatness as being the guarders of the holy place that need to be guarded? Also, we have to understand, they're not actually guarding. Why are we calling them the guarders? So we would possibly be able to say that that's also a reason why Rashi quotes the rabbi who said this, Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom. Why? Because according to his opinion, you can also call a newborn child based on what he's going to do in the future. Where do we see this? The Mishnah says in the Nedarim, if somebody says, I'm taking a vow not to have any benefit from anybody who's of the seed of Avraham, of the descendants of Avraham, he's not allowed to have any benefit from anyone Jewish, but he's allowed to have benefit from non-Jews. Ask the Yerushalmi, 1 second. Isn't Yishmael also part of the descendants of Avraham? And the Yerushalmi answers, no. It says that Hashem says, Ki beyitzchak yikol chazara. What's called the offspring of Avraham is only Avraham, the way he's born, who's born through Yitzchak. The other son not. So they want to ask, 1 second, but isn't Esav part of the descendants of Yitzchak? So Yehuda Reb Shalom says here, it says that I have called Yitzchak your continuation. Be Yitzchak, only part of Yitzchak is your continuation, not Esav. Ravuna says that Be Yitzchak, the son of Yitzchak, who is base, who is two, who has two worlds, this world, the next world. That's the one who's a continuation. So if you said, I'm not going to have any benefit from Zera, Avraham, from the offspring of Avraham, it goes down, not Yishmael, it goes down to Yitzchak, it goes down to Yaakov. But what do we see here? That he says Esav is included because it says Be Yitzchak, part of Yitzchak, and not Esav, only Yaakov. So it's not understood. What Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shalom said is that Be Yitzchak, Hashem says part of Yitzchak is considered the offspring of Abraham. But Esav was, after all said and done, was an offspring of Yitzchak, especially before the age of 13. Only at the age of 13 did he go out to do bad stuff. Yishmael is already Melachatchila called the son of the maidservant. Right? He's not called Avraham's son. In other words, he's from a different mother, and the mother's a maidservant. That's different. Here, Esav is from Rivka. So because at 13 he's going to be not good, that's why he's not considered the offspring of Avraham. So the Torah doesn't come to... Torah comes to clarify. But if the Torah speaks in way of clarity, where does it say here that only Yaakov is the descendants of Avraham, and not Esav? So we must say that because at the age of 13 he was going to go off the track, he went to do bad stuff. So already from the time of birth, we're saying Be Yitzchak Yichar Chazara. Part of Yitzchak will be considered the offspring of Avraham, not the whole Yitzchak. And we're already excluding Esav from when he's a young kid because he's going to be bad later on. Again, the Rebbe says, when we talk about good, when we talk about a good measure, it's always got to be more than the bad. So since if we're already discounting and cutting out Esau because he's going to be bad, so when it's talking about somebody who's going to do good, if the Levim are going to do the guarding from the age of 30 years old, we can already, from when they're born, call them that, right? The Rebbe says, and that would be great. That would explain how it fits in with that's the same Rabbi Yehuda Reb Sholem over here who says that, right, we count them from 30 days and they're already called the garters. But that teretz is not good. Why? Because Rashi, it's such an exquisite explanation. Rashi just hinted at it by bringing the name of the one who said this. But also, it says the same thing in the Bavli without this name. It's just a Stam Gemara. According to the Bavli, this wasn't Yehuda Reb Sholem. So, and more than this, Rashi already brought earlier that Ki be Yitzchak v'lo kol Yitzchak. In the pasuk, it says that I have called in Yitzchak your offspring. Rashi brings only part of Yitzchak, not all Yitzchak. He doesn't bring a Yehuda Reb Sholem earlier on in Bereshit. So the Rebbe says that's not the explanation of why he brings a Yehuda Reb Sholem. What is the explanation? Yud Beis. Explanation is with this concept of guarding the garters of the holy places. Rashi means simply guarding. What do you mean? At 30 days old, they're guarding? Yes, but the Levim guarded the Mishkan that a foreign person, in other words, a Yisrael, shouldn't get close to a place where he's not allowed to get, as it says that the Levim had to guard the places of the Mishkan that had to be guarded. That's why the Levim had to be camped around the Mishkan. And that's why they can be called guarders of the holy places. Why? Because at 30 days old, they're actually part of the encampment. They're being encamped with their mother, with their parents, around the Mishkan. They are already guarders of the holy guardianship. Even though they can't actually do the service of guarding. Whereas when it comes, that's why Rashi points out that they are already called the guarders, because when it comes to other services, they can't do it. Levim are called the Legion of the King for other things, opening the gates and singing and so on. You can't say that they're doing it, they can't do it. The guarding, which involves also being camped around the holy spaces, that they are doing. Yud Gimel. However, the Menchomesh Mikra asks, counting the Levim from 30 days old on shows that they have some kind of a virtues, they have some kind of an intrinsic value. But at 30, the fact that they're guarding has not got anything to do with them. He's not doing anything. His mother's there, so he's there too. She gave birth to him, she's holding on to him. He still needs his mother's care. And his mother's around the encampment of the Levium. So, but what's it got to do with him? Why are we saying it's his virtue or his prominence? Also, we could ask, just like the Levium are around the Mishkan, hey, all the Bnei Yisrael were around the Mishkan also. And they were, in a way, protecting also so that none of the nations of the world couldn't get close to the holy places. So what's so special about Levi that they're the guardianship? Every kid, every Jewish kid that's encamped around the Mishkan is also guarding, technically. So that's why Rashi brings it with Yehuda ben Shalom. Yehuda ben Shalom said this Shevet, this tribe is used to being counted from the womb. This tells us, this answers both questions. Shevet, Levi, the tribe of Levi, they're counted from the womb. In other words, even when the child is just coming out of the womb, and he's definitely dependent on his mother, but he's already counted as a separate entity. In order to make it clear, we should understand that Yocheved, when she completes the number of 70, it's not the way she is as her own entity, but yes, indeed, it's the way she is still dependent on her mother. That's what Rashi says. As they were entering in the entrance to Egypt, she gave birth. And also, if you count before she's born, you'll only see 70 missing one. In other words, you can't count Yocheved the way she is as an entity for herself after birth amongst the Jews that came to Egypt, that they're coming to Egypt. Because no, she was born as they were entering. She wasn't her own entity before they entered. However, when we do count her from when she's being born. We count her from the womb. In other words, she's coming in her mother's womb and then being born. So she's from those that come into Egypt, because she was in her mother's womb before she went into Egypt. And she's being born as they come into Egypt. And that's why it says that as she went into the doorway of Egypt, she was being born, and that's when she's counted. If she would have been born earlier, so she's already her own entity, just like all the other 70 souls. And it wouldn't tell us that she's counted mamish from the womb. No, she's already born, I don't know, a couple of days before. If she would be born after they entered, so you can't count her as those that went into Egypt. She's not part of the 70. Because so long as she's in her mother's womb, she's not her own entity. She's like a continuation, like the foot of her mother. However, since she was born at the entrance to Egypt, what is an entrance? Entrance connects the outside of the city with the inside of the city. So what we see here is that her being in her mother's womb before going in is connected with her birth as they're going in, and she's counted from the womb. And that's why we all say, if you count them, you'll see there's 70 missing one. Because even before she's born, there's 70 people. Because she was already fully formed in her mother's womb. But it would be 70 missing one. In other words, it would be missing the actual birth of one. Right? And she completed the number of 70 through her being born and coming to a state of shleimus, of wholesomeness. She brings a state of wholesomeness to the 70, which till now was missing one. Now there's 70. So we understand that Rabbi Shalom is telling us, we're calling this 30-day-old Levi a guard of the holy guardianship, but the Levim, they're used to already being a whole, adding some wholesomeness to Bnei Yisrael from their birth, like we see by Yocheved. We need to wait till 30 days here to make sure that that's considered a live birth. So now we'll say, now the Rebbe says the Yenishda, the wine of the Torah in this Rashi. There's a pasuk that says, just to give you a little background, the Rebbe is quoting a pasuk from Shmuel Beis. The pasuk there says, Anoichi Shalumei Emunei Yisrael. When there was a fellow who challenged David's leadership. His name was Sheva ben Bichri, and the army of David came to find him in a city he had run to, and they were going to come. David Melch's army was going to come and take the city. So a woman spoke up and said, "I am Shalume Emunei Yisrael," which means I'm literally somebody who has. I'll tell you what Rashi says. Rashi says, oops, I don't have the Rashi. So Chassid explain, what does this mean? I am a woman who speaks up and says, I am somebody who's faithful to the king. I represent the people here in this city. We're faithful to the king. What ends up happening is that Sheva ben Birchi himself is presented because he's the guilty one and he came to hide in the city, and the city is spared. The Chassidus explains what is the spiritual meaning of this based on the Zohar. It goes on Malchus. Malchus is saying, I am Shlume Emunei Yisrael. In other words, Shlume, I complete something for Yisrael. Says the Zohar that this goes on Malchus, which completes every sphere, because the 10th level of every sphere is Malchus. And what that means is that not just does Malchus bring a wholesomeness, a completion to the number of the 10 spheres, the 10th sphere of Malchus, which this is not something special about spheres of Malchus. Every sphere really is completing the number 10. If you have 10 things, each of the 10 is part of the 10. Sometimes for a minion, well, am I the 10th? Everyone's the 10th if you have exactly 10. But besides that, being just part of the number and completing that number, Malchus also brings a wholesomeness to each of the 10 spheres, to each of the spheres. And this we understand. There's another chazal. The sages say on the pasuk, I am the one who's the faithful one of Israel, that really in persona, our sages tell us who spoke up from that city was Serach. Serach, the daughter of Usher. Hundreds of years later, she lived very long. And she says, I was the one that completed the number of Jews, Shalume, from completion. I was the one who completed the number of Jews when they went into Egypt to make them 70. And I also made a wholesomeness to them. She's part of the 70 that went into Egypt. For this, we can understand that also Yechevet, when we say Hishlima, that is a certain completion and wholesomeness in the count of the Bnei Yisrael. And we're going to now translate this into Malchus. It's a little bit Kabbalistic here. In Tezvav. The fact that Malchus achieves a shleimus, a completion in all the spheres, it's because Malchus, through Malchus, what happens through Malchus? The revelation of Atzilus gets drawn down even into the worlds of Biyah, Bria, Yetzir, Asiyah. And that's the main purpose of Hashem, who creates, who emanates the world of Atzilus, that it should come down into the created worlds as well. However, since Malchus is enclosed in the worlds of Bria, Yetzir, Asiyah, she doesn't have, the way it is enclosed there, doesn't have the power on its own to bring down a revelation in those worlds of Biyah, because there's a concept, if you're tied up, you can't release yourself. So it itself is a midah, is an attribute of more concealing in order to allow the next world to come. And how does it then reveal into the next world? How does it happen? The way it works is because in Malchus there's an illumination of light from spheres that are higher than Malchus. And then that forces the light to go down from Malchus further into the worlds of Bria, Yetzir, Asiyah. And this is the internal reason, the inner reason, that Yechevet was one who completed the number in a way that her birth was, as they went into Egypt, the Pesach, door of Egypt, the entranceway to Egypt, because in order to be able to achieve the shleimus, the wholesomeness of the count of the Bnei Yisrael, that's dafka, that's particularly when her birth was with the coming into where? To Egypt, just like the descent of Malchus to the worlds of Biyah. However, on the other hand, all the days of her pregnancy were before going into Egypt. And that's why she can be counted as part of the number, because remember, the number is only for those that are coming into Egypt. If she'd been born after that, she wouldn't be counted. She was already born in Egypt. No, but she's fully formed and now going to Egypt and born at the entrance. And this, if you parallel this to Malchus, it tells us that the power to come into Egypt and to create a redemption, as it says, the Yocheved kept the girls alive, the children alive when she was as a midwife. How is that power to go down and bring redemption to Egypt? It's because it starts from higher than Egypt. In this case, the pregnancy took place outside of Egypt. That's why she was able to come and bring a wholesomeness and effect a redemption. And this is also expressed in the language of the name of the one who said Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shalom Yehuda is for, as the name of Yehuda goes, because Leah said, now I have to thank Hashem. That refers to the level of Malchus. Shalom goes on Torah, because Shalom is peace, and the Torah is given to make peace in the world. And it also goes in spheres. It goes on the sphere of Tiferes, the sphere of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Yehuda Reb Shalom is therefore a connection of Malchus and Tiferes, which is Kabbalah Sel, obedience, accepting the kingship of Hashem, and Torah. And in Torah itself, the connection of the revealed part of the Torah, which is Malchus, with the inner aspect of the Torah, which is Tiferes. Because in that aspect of Torah, the inner part of Torah, there's no questions and there's no machlekes. We learn information about Hashem, unlike the revealed Torah, which has a lot of questions and answers and so on. Through this joining up, this brings the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.